Hi, my name's Alfie and I'm an ex-young filmmaker that's come through the Offshoot Foundation. I started off in the young filmmaker workshops in my early teens, and then in my later years when I went to college, I started to work for the Offshoot Foundation as a teacher in the workshops and doing some camera work and editing. I've since gone on to work full-time in the industry in London, starting off as an apprentice, and then I've worked my way up since then, and I'm now a visual effects lead at a post-production studio. My first experience with Offshoot was when I was in year 9 and Paul and Dan came into my high school to make a promotional video for the school. And while they were doing that, they did a 3-day workshop with us where we were shown how to use the cameras and how to edit, how to set up lighting for an interview. I'd never really done any filmmaking before. I was interested in YouTube and making fun videos with my friends at home. And the combination of that interest at home and doing this workshop really piqued my interest. So I decided to ask Paul if he would take me on for my work experience placement the following year. Thankfully he said yes, and between then and the 10 months later when I actually went to do my work experience, Paul very generously started to take me on small jobs with him here and there and give me some editing to do in my free time, which allowed me to keep up my interest and stay busy between then and when I got to start working with him properly. The part I enjoyed most was definitely the hands-on aspect of the learning in the early days. Learning how to use the cameras, all the different types of gear like tripods, steadicams, sliders, learning how to film different things like interviews and B-roll, and also learning how to edit. One of my favourite things was sitting down to edit a video and seeing all the pieces come together like a puzzle. And all these years later I still find that same enjoyment in my day-to-day job now. The obvious answer to this question would be the tactile things like learning to use a camera and editing, as I've already mentioned. But I think a lot of the most important lessons that I took away from my time with the Offshoot Foundation were the unspoken lessons that I learned just through osmosis of being around the professional filmmakers. I specifically remember my summer holidays from school when I went around with Dan for about 6 weeks filming interviews. I wasn't really there to do anything specific, it was just for experience and to observe. And still to this day I remember looking at the way that Dan would talk to people while he was putting their lav mics on to put them at ease before an interview and make conversation with them so they didn't feel so awkward. It's things like that that nobody sat me down and said this is what you should do before an interview with somebody, but just through time and exposure to small things like that I started to pick up on lots of really small helpful lessons that have gone on to be very useful in my current career. Throughout the few years that I worked for the foundation, I did lots of interviews with members of parliament and CEOs of companies, etc. And being a teenager at the time, it was a little bit daunting talking to people that were so important and so much older than me. But that experience became really useful when I went on to become an apprentice, and I was again much younger than everybody else at the company. That's when those communication skills and the confidence that I built up from my years working with the foundation came in really useful. I found it very natural communicating with people that were much older than me, and I think that's a skill a lot of young people really struggle with when they first go into the workplace. The impact of Offshoot on young creatives is enormous. On a personal level, it was the beginning of everything for me. Like I said, I didn't really know I wanted to be a filmmaker before I did that workshop in high school with Paul. And on a wider scale, the friends that I made in the young filmmaker workshops have all gone into the industry or are currently studying at university to go on to do so. And it was a massive benefit for all of us when we went on to study things like media and filmmaking at college or university. And before we even got there, we were very well versed in using cameras, using editing software, and just generally making films. For me, Offshoot is so much more than a charity. It's friendship, it's experience, and it's opportunity. There's a passing of the baton as the years go by, and the next generations of young filmmakers start to come up through the ranks. I remember when I first started and I would idolise the people that were teaching the workshops, and it was incredibly inspirational and fulfilling when years later I found myself in their position. It was amazing to be teaching at the workshops and seeing people starting younger than me that were far more passionate and capable than I was at their age, and being able to stay in touch with them all these years later to see what they've gone on to do since. I'm eternally grateful for everything the Offshoot Foundation has created for me. Thank you.